Thanks very much, John. And look, welcome to everyone, and thanks for taking the time tonight to join. Just a couple of things before I kick off. I've got the presentation on my screen, so unfortunately I can't see anyone or everyone. So once I do finish the slide deck, I'll certainly jump off when we move into more Q&A. Before I work into open banking or open data, and I'll talk to those two terms as we get into the session. In terms of Great Southern Bank, as John mentioned, formerly COA, or Credit Union Australia, and we've recently had a rebrand to Great Southern Bank, which is quite exciting. So for those of you that don't know who we are, we offer financial and insurance products to over 500,000 Australians. Our purpose is to help all Australians achieve the dream of owning their own home. And the difference between, I guess, us and the listed banks is that as a customer, you're actually shareholders. So you actually get a say in what we do. And that obviously drives very much a member focus or customer focus for us at Great Southern Bank. John mentioned, at Great Southern Bank, very much a newly appointed role of head of open banking. I think it's now week 4 for me into that role, but I'm certainly not a stranger to this space in that I've been the business owner of the open banking project since inception. And prior to that, having owned the data analytics business as head of enterprise data analytics for Great Southern Bank for the last 4.5, 5 years, this was a natural area of curiosity for me. So I was the one informing our executive and board in terms of obviously the developments 2 or 3 years ago, which is where I'm going to start shortly. Before we knew it, we had quite a significant business case and then program of work on board. One thing I just will correct with John, he's absolutely correct in terms of the last 4.5, 5 years running data at Great Southern Bank, but I've actually been at Great Southern Bank and COA for just over 11 years, and this is actually my 6th role. So had quite a journey there and come from sort of a broad generalist background before, I guess, specialising in more data analytics related items in the last sort of 4 to 5 years. So that's a bit about me. So today, now agenda. So I'm hoping you can all see that. So I'm going to talk through, and some of this was obviously on the invite in terms of the session today. I do want to go back to some of the background and foundations of open banking, because I think it actually provides quite important context in terms of why it's been implemented, what it's fundamentally about, and actually what the federal government is trying to do with this. I'll talk a bit about what it actually is, and hopefully those of you that do have a reasonable level of understanding or a good level of understanding, or indeed working in open banking, hopefully that doesn't patronise you too much, but I'm trying to cater for a broad audience here. So excuse me if I'm going back to too many basics, but I won't sort of dwell too much on that. I'll then work through and give you some key insights, not only in terms of some pretty significant developments that are happening domestically at the moment, in terms of this going across industry, even changes to the existing regime in terms of the domestic market here, but also what's happening internationally. As many of you would probably know, the UK implemented this back in mid-2018. It's different the way it's been implemented, but there are certainly some similarities and learnings that we can draw from that. I'm then going to touch on what some of the use cases may look like in the future, and depending on how this plays out, just to try to then bring that to light. I'll then give a few insights in terms of the journey that we've been on at Great Southern Bank, and my slides are quite scarce, but I'll sort of verbally work through a few items there in a bit more detail, and I'll try and answer any questions that you've got there as best I can. Obviously respecting that there will be some things that are commercial in confidence as well. All right, so background and foundations. So look, going back, about 4 or 5 years ago, largely this is a response to several government reviews, Coleman, Murray, Harper, etc. And also, many of you would know about, if not experienced firsthand, the Royal Banking Commission. Obviously, there were certain behaviours, lack of customer focus, and there's always been, I guess, a focus on competition in terms of the banking market and more broadly. you know, to ensure that, you know, that competition has been enabled. And, you know, as I work through this, you'll see that, you know, that's really a key theme and a key driver of that. So in May 2017, the Australian Government Productivity Commissioner's report dropped, and that was entitled Inquiry into Data Availability and Use, and that made 41 recommendations. Now, you know, if you are interested in these things, you know, Google them. They're all, you know, publicly available. And, you know, by and large, they're actually not bad reading. And, you know, but does very much set the context, as I mentioned before, in terms of what this is all about. Then came along quite soon after that, actually, the review into open banking in Australia. And that was led by a gentleman by the name of Scott Farrell. And for those of you that don't know Scott Farrell, he's a partner in Mallesons, or King and Wood, as they're known now. And he was quite an instrumental and has been a well-known lawyer in the payments space. And there certainly are some similarities that we can draw, I think, and he's certainly done that in the open banking review into open banking, draw on some of those similarities in terms of actually the end-to-end payment scheme that happens in the world of banking, and, you know, using that to a degree to be a basis of the ecosystem of open banking and what will become open data. Off the back end of that, there was legislation that was put up and subsequently approved, which is known as the Consumer Data Right Act, and implementation commenced across the industry. The four majors are ahead of the rest of the industry by about 12 months, and really that was down to, you know, size and scale and you know, budget and obviously market share. You know, with getting them ahead of the, well, not ahead of the game, but implementing. And, you know, obviously from a government perspective, it's important to show action around these things. I guess an interesting point around this, which, you know, some of you may or may not know, is that Scott Morrison, our current Prime Minister, when he was actually Treasurer, this was his baby. So, you know, interestingly, I think there's been about 4 change of dates in relation to certainly, you know, the dates that we need to adhere to. As it came into the federal election a few years ago, you know, there's some questions around whether this would continue or not. But obviously, you know, him being Prime Minister and this being, you know, one of his babies when he was Treasurer, you know, certainly it's absolutely not going away, and we're seeing that, and also in the most recent federal budget, there was upwards of about $110 million allocated to this space to actually continue to accelerate, you know, what needs to be done. I do think it's actually one of those initiatives that's politically agnostic, i.e., you know, should you know, a Labor Party come into power, that I think this would be something that would continue to be pursued forward, given it's in the best interests of consumers and competition, etc. So I don't think there's necessarily any threat that would be one of those things that would actually pause, stop, or necessarily slow down, you know, should any change in government occur in the future. So then following that, with implementation, many of the majors, or sorry, all of the majors are actually live, obviously, with various stages, and I think they have another drop in November. And the next tier down of banks, our first compliance dates for what's known as product reference data, and I'll get onto some of these definitions in a moment. They were both in August last year and October last year. We went live in August a bit earlier, but October last year and February this year. And then our big release date was 1 July, just gone, to start making data available right down to the customer level. And as you'd appreciate, you know, having kind of general product data available vis-a-vis, you know, customer data, that's a significant release in terms of actually these programs of work. And once again, I'll give you some insight into that shortly. So as all of that was happening, a further future directions for the Consumer Data Right Act paper was put together. So that was published in October and dropped in December 2020. And once again, Scott Farrell was the guy that ran that and wrote that. And really what that was about is, okay, now this is largely in place, you know, amongst the 4 majors. It's well into implementation in terms of you know, the broader banking sector. What else? how does this then move into other sectors? How can we do some deliberate things in terms of creating competition? Does it need tweaking? Does it need adding to, etc.? And there's several items in there that I'll talk to that are very much coming to life at the moment, and will no doubt have significant impacts if taken on board and if implemented in terms of competition. And threats to certainly organisations like ours, other banks, and certainly I think driving partnerships and maybe hopefully healthy relationship with fintechs and the like. The final point on that slide as well that I wanted to touch on is Senator Jane Hume was then appointed in terms of taking on a digital and data portfolio, which is a combination of several portfolios, but a relatively new portfolio overall. And she's been tasked with, and once again, this is publicly announced, that they're in the early stages of actually forming up a digital and data regulator. So the regulator of open banking at this point in time is ACCC, given it's actually competition and consumer focused. But there is a view floating around that as the regulator is stood up in terms of the data and digital economy, that regulatory enforcement will actually shift over to that. So you can see, as a result of that, there's a reasonable history with this. It's quite structured, and it's certainly gaining momentum, which I'll come on to shortly. So what is open banking? Now, as I mentioned before, I've made the assumption that I've got people with various kind of, no doubt, knowledge and exposure, to open banking. So very simply put, it's putting your data back in your control so you can use it for your benefit. And I also mentioned earlier that the primary driver is to drive competition in the Australian economy and potentially across the world, as this kind of goes across jurisdictions. Why is it called open banking? So this actually has commenced in the bank industry, and the reason why we were the lucky ones, some would argue differently to that, but the reason why we were chosen is that, I guess as banks, we are very much used to regulation. I mentioned before, there are some very close similarities with the payment scheme and how payments operate. So we were chosen, I guess, as the guinea pigs per se as an industry to actually roll this out. And on the back end of the Royal Commission, there was clearly a need to actually have some deliberate moves from from a government level in terms of intervention to at least be seen that competition is being created. Now, I guess don't be fooled by that, because it's actually really open data, and you'll see a transition in the name with this. I think probably within a year, possibly sooner, because it will ultimately become open data, and it will be legislated to be implemented across industry. So, by way of an example, there, the consultation with the energy industry has just completed. And the rules by Treasury are currently in draft. So, there is then not far off, once those rules are completed, they'll be finalised, and then, there'll be implementation in the energy sector. There's strategic reviews going on in terms of the telco sector and how this might work and increase competition or bring consumer benefit to telco. Discussions have started with the superannuation industry. And it's likely then that there, other industries such as insurance will closely follow. So as you can see, whilst it started as open banking, and that's kind of largely what it's referred to currently, it is ultimately open data, and will certainly be right across the economy, and hence why there's these early works going on around this digital and data regulator. So a little bit about the terminology and, what we call PRD 1, 2, and 3 and CDR 1, 2, and 3, which kind of tend to roll off our tongues because we're kind of living it all day, every day, and things like data holders and accredited data recipients. So what does all that mean? So as banks, as holders of a lot of data and information, we are currently designated as data holders. So what that means is that we must comply by law with the obligations of the Consumer Data Right Act, which means that we must at certain points have data available that we can send out on our customers' request to other parties that are accredited in the ecosystem, where they have asked us to move that data. So I simplify that. I call data holder, you need to be compliant with data out. It's largely a compliance project. Well, not largely, it is a compliance project. It's a threat, right? Because it's actually your data leaving the building. Now, I'll be very careful in my language there, because at the end of the day, it is actually the customers, it's your data at the end of the day. And that's once again what I think a lot of corporates have actually lost sight of here. It's not our data, it's your data. And all of this work that's going on here is actually an enabler to help shift that information, your information around quicker, easier for your benefit. Now, there's also an opportunity for both banks, ourselves, and other companies, such as largely fintechs, to become what's known as a accredited data recipient. So then there's a number of hurdles that accredited data recipients need to go through, as you would expect, given the information and data that these companies will potentially be receiving. And then once they have become an accredited data recipient in the open banking ecosystem, they then have a right based on consent. So this is all consent driven, to actually then consume information. So what might that look like? Us currently as a data holder, and Commonwealth Bank is already a data holder and an accredited data recipient. One of our customers could go to the Commonwealth Bank. We would get a request with consent from that customer, and then we would then need to, by law, lift and shift that data over to the Commonwealth Bank. Now, I'm going to come on to some use cases shortly in terms of why we would do that and how all that works. I mentioned this before, but regulation is via the ACCC's enforcement and compliance team. And once again, the rationale for that was initially WISE and APRA, our regulator, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. But because this is actually bigger than banking, it's actually more about competition. That's actually why the ACCC was chosen as the regulator and enforcement. I must say, they're learning with this implementation as well. And they've been quite pragmatic with the industry in terms of actually, us being compliant and getting where we need to in terms of implementations, because these are big projects, and once again, I'll talk to that shortly. There are 700 plus now obligations that need to be met across the data holders and accredited data recipients. What's product reference data? So product reference data is actually largely the information that's already available on our websites as banks, that you could actually go and have a look. So pricing, terms, conditions, fees and charges, etc. But really what we need to do is actually make that consumable via an API. So there's 3 releases: product reference data 1, which was transaction accounts and credit card accounts. PRD2 was mortgages, and then PRD3 is all other banking products. Similarly, CDR, which is actually consumer data right, but that's actually the data down to the customer level, and it follows a similar pattern in terms of transaction accounts and credit card accounts down to Chris Malcolm, okay, then mortgages, and then following the rest of the banking products. I think the OAIC comment that I've written there sums it up quite well, and you probably can't read that depending on the size of your screen, but the consumer data right aims to help you monitor your finances, utilities, and other services, and compare and switch between different offerings more easily. The system also aims to encourage innovation and competition between service providers, helping you access products and services that best suit your specific needs. Now, that little screenshot on the right-hand side there, that is the Consumer Data Right website. And once again, publicly available there is all of the current data holders that are live, aka banks, and the current data recipients. So there's currently 32 brands that are live, of which is actually 16 banks. And there's 13 as data holders, and there's 13 data recipients, of which some are banks as well. So that's a little bit about what open banking is, what open data is, and why we kind of use these terms to a degree interchangeably at the moment. What are some recent developments, both domestically and internationally? So there are three, I guess, kind of key things going on at the moment. I was actually in a couple of sessions this afternoon with Treasury and the ACCC, getting some updates on these, and some of you may have been in that as well. But there is currently a consultation in progress. So what Treasury do is where they want to change the open banking ecosystem or regime, not too dissimilar to what they do in other sectors, they go through a consultation process. So there are papers out currently in consultation, and that consultation is open until the end of July, where they're seeking feedback. There's three key things amongst other, but there's three kind of large ticket items in that consultation paper and process that they're going through there at the moment. The first one is around empowering consumers to share their consumer data with trusted advisors. So at the moment, yes, it can go to other approved data recipients. Me as a consumer can get my data myself. What this is actually consulting on is I might then choose to authorise Great Southern Bank to say, hey, can you give that data to my trusted advisor, being an accountant, financial planner, a lawyer, and there's a category that kind of talks about what trusted advisors are. So that's number one. Number two, they're wanting to support what they call support new pathways for participation. What does that mean? So if you are an accredited data recipient, an ADR, they are now looking at introducing agency type arrangements where, once Great Southern Bank, if and when chooses to become an ADR, we might then appoint a sub agent to effectively take consent on our behalf. So, once again, that allows more participants in the ecosystem, but obviously what needs to be balanced here is then how does that work in terms of, privacy, confidentiality, data leakages, all those sorts of things. So yeah, these are all the considerations that are working through at the moment. So that's number two. Number three, there's this concept of joint accounts. So in the CDR release 2, there was joint account obligations. They removed joint accounts because of some of the complexities around it, aka one joint account may not want to consent to have their data information lifted and shifted where others may. So there's actually just a lot more complexity around that, and they're consulting with the industry to understand that a lot more. I mean, at the end of the day, the ACCC and Treasury, they're not banks per se, so they're actually working with the industry to understand those things better. The other thing that's actually floating around is what's known as the Action Initiation Framework. That's a really fancy name in my view for what's called right access. So what does that mean? So at the moment, data is read-only that is actually potentially moved from us to another institution to us. So what that means is we could then maybe use that to, on the consent of the consumer, say, hey, John, we think by moving across to Great Southern Bank that you're better off by X, but then largely a lot of that heavy lifting still falls back on us as the consumer. Right access actually enables us to then go, oh, and by the way, John, would you like to give us consent so we can action that for you? Now, that may seem like a nuance, but it's actually quite profound, and it's actually quite a significant game changer because it rapidly increases the threat to change, because I suspect a lot of the people on this call are a bit like me, where you don't have the time outside of our busy lives to actually do the heavy lifting yourself, depending on kind of the size, I guess, the prize at the end. But as soon as someone can do that on your behalf, that's a game changer in terms of the threats that may exist. And then the third one is obviously the broader industry, which I kind of spoke to on the previous slide. But that is very much here and now. And I guess kind of 2 or 3 years ago, that seemed a long way away, but it is very much here and now. And you can even see by those other areas that there's very much focus on how can we make this better? How can we speed this up? How can we make sure that it's actually having an impact in terms of competition? Briefly, international developments. I won't dwell too much on this, but you can see there that there's kind of 700 million API hits at the moment in terms of the open banking regime. It's a little dangerous to make an exact comparison. It's sort of kind of apples and oranges, in terms of what's happening in the UK to here, but it at least gives an indication. My feel is that whilst take up here will initially be slow, similar to the UK, it won't be as slow. And I think, some of the recent intervention and some of this thinking with papers will actually kind of force this to speed up. I think that's an interesting point there, just in the top left-hand corner. What I've noted down there is over 3 million UK consumers and businesses were using open banking enabled products at the start of 2021. So this is clearly having an impact. And throughout 2020, open banking propositions made existing processes such as checking or improving credit card scores and comparing financial products easier, faster, and more accurate. So there's some real examples there. All right, I'm going to rattle through these next two in about the next 5 minutes, so we can actually allow some time for discussion and interaction as best we can over the Zoom. So what are the opportunities and the potential to revolutionise? Some of you may have heard these examples, some of you may not. There may be click to save offers. So one of the examples that is often spoke about is, okay, you might then see new partnerships across the industry. So you might see a bank partner with an energy company. As a result of, I guess, once again, this is where it's kind of relevant to DAMA and data, because all this is data driven. Is that you might then see some modelling, and then I may get a proactive note from my bank that says, hi Chris, we've just noticed that you paid your electricity bill for this quarter. It's $658. People in your postcode on average are paying $458. They're with this provider. Click to change, right? So then I go, wow, my bank's actually added value to my life. They've saved me a couple $100 a quarter. And then potentially it might be a new revenue stream for the bank where they're partnering and selling, I guess, reselling energy plans as well. Now, lots of things got to happen for that, but you can once again see the richness and the reliance back onto what we do today. In terms of actually modelling and understanding. And I think in its simplest form as well, I often say the data available through open banking is actually just another data source. We've actually got lots of data sources that we probably all have in our organisation today that we don't even leverage and use. This is actually just another data source. So no matter what, we have to really continue to up our data capabilities if we want to leverage not only our existing data sets, but also these data sets as well. But this might be a reason to actually help you do that and help with the business case that sits around it. Another interesting development around this is what's the future of payment schemes. This is somewhat controversial, but it's kind of been spoken a bit about now. So what I mean by payment schemes are your Visas, your MasterCard, your EFTPOS, etc. So at the moment, it's quite common to log on to an airline's website, maybe not a good example at the moment, but an airline's website, you pull your card out, you pay with your card. There might be a way in the future where you effectively, via this scheme and via the right access, that you authorise that merchant to go and collect that money directly from your bank, and you give them consent to do that. What's the benefit of that? Well, it actually takes a lot of the merchant fees out of the system, which are, can add to quite a large cost to business. So the cost of payments effectively goes down. The other one there is frictionless processes. So, you might see, rather than today, you're going for a loan and typically you need to provide your bank statements and you send them across in a PDF. How do you then, as a, I guess a credit assessing business, you receive that information electronically. So how do you look across your processes to then actually bring some frictionless or seamlessness or more automation to your processes, not to mention a better customer experience. Some broader examples that the CDR website talks about is track your spending across banks to help you meet your savings. So rather than actually having to have all of your information with one bank, which then gives you a consolidated position of your kind of personal P&L, you might be able to have different products at different institutions, but it all feeds into one consolidated position no matter where your financial relationship is. the ability to compare mortgages. And look, PRD, product reference data, this is already enabling this. More frequent, more accurate updating of kind of, you compare your product comparison websites the like, and bringing more richness and information to those and more currency to that data as well. And then, so on and so forth. So you're helping you save on your phone bills by finding the right plan, et cetera, et cetera. So, very much getting the data. The last one there, which I will touch on, find the best credit card for your lifestyle and budget. Why is that different to today? Well, it's actually once again coming back to data to go, I've got data on my behaviors and what I do now and how I kind of use my products and services, and then matching that with actually what the best product is there in the marketplace. And that all happens kind of more in a data and digital sense, as opposed to a conversation that might happen today, which a lot of things get left out of that. You've got the benefit of the richness of the data there. All right, briefly on our journey. So look, it has been one hell of a journey for us, and I know we're not certainly unique in that regard. It is a significant project or program. Actually, we refer to it at Great Southern Bank because it's a lot bigger than a project. Now, whilst there is a high cost of compliance, which is industry wide, because there is a lot of complexity with this, as you would expect with privacy, security, data, etc. One of the things that I would encourage those of you that haven't embarked on this journey yet, that may be in industries that are kind of next cab off the rank, is to think about your strategic enterprise foundations as part of the program, and does this give you the ability to uplift those capabilities as a result of that. Yes, the primary scope is comply. I mentioned the data holder obligations prior, but I think it's important that you also don't lose sight of those, compete or strategic responses in terms of, what you're doing in relation to open banking. This might be helpful for those of you in banking and hopefully more broadly. But one of the analogies, I guess, or similarities rather, that I use, and I mentioned some of the similarities before in relation to payments, is there was a big project in the banking industry a few years ago called NPP, which effectively enables faster payments. Now, as banks, the umbrella of payments, we actually all knew how to do payments, and there's multiple channels. There's direct entry when we're transferring money via our internet and mobile banking. There's BPay, there's cards, there's checks. They're all basically channels of payments. And NPP largely is just another channel. It's actually just moving money quicker, but it's still, it's still a payment. It's still the movement of money. But the overall payment as an umbrella kind of sits over the top of that. This is not a channel. It is actually an umbrella, I guess, that actually sits over the top. So, you do need to be comfortable with some ambiguity in terms of what this means, because there is quite a significant learning curve for the organisation, to get up to speed with this. And, you saw me before, showing how many obligations need to be met with this and their compliance obligations. So, clearly no tolerance to not be meeting compliance and regulatory obligations. Don't underestimate the complexity of this program, and get good expertise in early. I want to talk a bit about exemptions, because you'll actually notice that that we're not live yet now in terms of CDR1, and that was actually due 1 July. We went to the ACCC early. When I say early this calendar year, and there is a process that you can go through based on evidence and proof that you've got to actually request an exemption. So we, and I think there's about 20 other banks that have been successful in being granted an exemption since February this year, to actually move our CDR1 compliance date to 1 November this year. The reason I can share that with you is, once again, that's all on the public registers, and you can actually search for that and go and have a look, both, who's got exemptions, who doesn't. There are some banks at the moment that don't have an exemption and haven't gone live. So in theory, yes, they are in breach of the regulatory and compliance requirement. But the ACCC is doing a great job in terms of actually, their view is, we don't want to be slapping fines on corporates yet. We actually just want to encourage people and actually support and help people getting live, because that actually gets us to competition and gets this regime up and running, quicker and faster. This is regulation, yes, and that's kind of pretty boring, but it's important that that regulation is focused on. But as I mentioned earlier, certainly don't lose sight of that, strategic response, and especially as it moves, across industry, both, what does it mean in the banking sector, but also kind of more broadly in the economy, which, hopefully I've given you a flavour of tonight. I'm going to leave it there because I've rattled on for a bit over 35 minutes, and I promised John that I go for about 20, 25 minutes. But I'm clearly passionate and excited about open banking, and that's why I'm particularly fortunate that a role came up to me, and I was I was and still am very passionate about data and analytics. But I certainly think moving into this space as well is an extension of that, and it is certainly exciting new space, and I'd encourage you to be very curious about it. So, John, how would I hand back to you? I'll stop my screen sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was an exceptional overview. If people have questions, can you please put them into the Q&A tab, and we'll respond to them online. I found that exceptionally interesting, and the nuances there as that gets rolled across various industries is going to be quite challenging. I'm just wondering from your experience, Chris, where you've seen the most challenging part of the whole program.
Look, I think one of the benefits of those that come after the banking sector was, even going back to, the early, RFP days, and I'm not just talking kind of Great Southern Banking, I'm talking more broadly. There are very few open banking technology vendor solutions in the market. So, so therefore you either build your own capability, and I know that's organizational choice sometimes. Our preference is to partner, or you partner. So actually kind of, initially working through that to try and understand, but, there are now some open banking or open data vendors that are, they've got traction in the banking sector, and I suspect they'll have cross-industry, offerings. I think the other thing as well, and I mentioned this throughout the presentation, is, we underestimated the size and scale and complexity of this thing. Now, fortunately for us, but we did start early. So even though we did that, we had opportunity, we had time on our hands to respond. And when we spoke to the ACCC about our exemption request, they could see the evidence that we had actually taken this seriously. We had started working on it early. And that's I think the reason why we were granted exemption. It wasn't an easy process, by the way. They certainly weren't giving out free tickets to the game. But I think responding quickly and early, would be my other kind of key area where, especially as well, we probably had a bit of time because we were the first industry. But I think obviously as it's now implemented in the banking sector, and obviously there's a number of kind of dates which I didn't go into. So CDR 1 July, CDR 2 November this year, CDR 3 February next year. There's some discussion about a CDR 4. I think the final answer to that question as well, John, would be expect change. So the ACCC and Treasury, and I'm not necessarily speaking out of school here, is the look. So one way, maybe this is not the diplomatic way to answer it, but the goalposts have been moved or got fatter or bigger or kind of but and that's just we've had to cop that, and some of those changes have been quite significant, both in terms of how we've had to, increase our scope, change our technology solution, and some of the timings of that haven't been, as generous as they could have been. But once again, I think giving the ACCC and the Treasury guys the benefit of the doubt, I think they're actually learning from that. And I think once again, those that come after us will actually have the benefit of that.
You're very kind to the regulators and the government. It's good to see.
I have to be, right. I know this is recorded. I don't necessarily know who's on the call.
Absolutely. At the moment, there's not a lot of questions coming through. In terms of the governance issues that are involved in this, did you have to set up special structures and committees to actually enhance your existing data governance, or was your current data governance structures sort of handle this okay, if you get what I mean?
Yeah, look, good question, John. So, you know, there are quite significant. So when I talk about the 700 plus obligations, you know, there are data governance obligations. There's data quality obligations, and you know, so guess what? Data governance is actually at the heart of a lot of these things. We had a reasonable head start. But you know, we certainly leveraged open banking to help continue to uplift our data governance and quality capabilities, etc. And I guess when I kind of said more broadly, and I was purposely being a little bit vague, but when I said, you know, think about the capabilities that you need, you may struggle to get business cases up for currently. Open data will give you a reason to actually get a business case that sits behind that. That's data governance. It's potentially data capabilities, depending where people's data maturity is at. You know, it's might be things like identity and access management. You know, those sorts of things.
And I suppose that leads to another issue, which is probably prevalent in the industry anyway, but moving to open data, is there a lot of expertise in the market, or are we sort of training people up at this point in time to actually deal with this?
Yeah, look, it's been a real struggle. You know, I feel like a crack record. I think once again, other industries will probably get the benefit of skilled resource coming out of the banking sector. But yeah, look, I know, you know, once again, it's an industry project, right? So, and yeah, there's only so many resources. You know, there wasn't a couple of planes or boats arrived from the UK to go, hi, we're here now to implement your open banking. There's a little bit of that. But, you know, we did, and I know others have as well, you know, had to rely on, you know, certainly some third party advice and expertise from, you know, the four majors and other kind of boutique firms, to actually, you know, do some checking and balancing in terms of, you know, obligations and so on and so forth. So, you know, and I mean, we're searching at the moment, for example, for a, you know, senior product manager open banking. Ideally, we want someone with retail product banking experience and open banking, but that's largely a unicorn, right? So, you know, we'll have to compromise for that because, you know, they do exist, but there's probably about 3 of them in Sydney.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can just imagine some of the challenges that you face there, Chris. Oh, we have a question from the floor. I'll just read it out. It's from an anonymous attendee. Are you aware of any examples, domestic or international, where banks have driven an uplift in revenue or value by leveraging open banking implementation?
So I'm not aware yet of any in Australia. One of the quite advanced, and many on this call might have heard about them, but one of the quite advanced data recipients is a company by the name of Frollo, FROLLO. Now, in the UK, there are some examples. I don't have any examples off the top of my head, and I probably should become more prepared with that. But I'm happy to share, you know, afterwards, or whoever that is. I'm happy for you to reach out to me. Because we are starting to see in the UK, you know, innovation actually working. We're starting to see some revenue and customer benefits, you know, as coming out the back end of that. One of my concerns in the Australian market, now this will be driven probably by market forces, is the unknown here, is my worry a little bit is that the potential unintended consequence of the cost to comply may slow available capital to spend on innovation. because, you know, as an industry, we've had to spend a lot of money to comply with this. I mean, these were $2-3 million projects at the big four, right? So, you know, I hope that doesn't kind of slow down and hamstrung the innovation, you know, or the, you know, but that said, market forces may take over there. You know, there's some bloody good fintechs and some really interesting offerings out there, and they've got the right and already are becoming ADRs. So, and look, I know that, you know, the federal government is absolutely driving this. So, you know, I think we'll see those things quicker in Australia and the UK. But yeah, look, if you can either Google it, but there's absolute examples of that happening in the UK, and more broadly, by the way, I'm only talking to the UK because it's similar to ours in terms of it was legislated. There's actually other economies or jurisdictions across the world where this hasn't been driven by regulation, and it's purely been driven by commercial and customer benefit. And guess what the business case for that is, right? I mean, you know, it's obviously driving, you know, efficiencies or profitabilities or better customer experiences.
Yeah, the frustration of the customer. I've got 3 accounts with you. Which one's your account and all those sorts of things. You need all that information at your fingertips now.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got another question from Christine. I'll just read it out. If this data is to become truly open, in brackets public, what de-identification is applied and where will it be available?
Yeah, so look, part of that question is above my pay grade, but what I will say is that, you know, obviously the privacy, security of information in the ecosystem is absolutely top of mind, and there's several drivers for that, right? So, you know, the ACCC are on public record saying, do not force yourself to go live. We will work with you. Don't feel like, you might be in breach of a regulatory or compliance requirement, but, you know, do not put consumer information and data at risk. Now, the word public, I guess, used in that question, Christine's an interesting one, because, you know, it's not kind of, you know, it's not the telephone book, right? Like it's still protected. It's within a trusted ecosystem. You know, that's why, you know, ADRs need to go through a process to become registered. You know, us as banks do get a easier process in terms of becoming an ADR, but that's because of obviously a lot of the regulation that we already need to comply to. Now, all that said, you know, there are rules around consenting and unconsenting and removing of data, and, you know, all of that flowing through, and there's a fair bit of complexity around that. So I probably can't answer this question in terms of the justice that it needs. But I had one other point to make in relation to that. That's what I was going to say. I do think, however, all that said, and once again, I'll draw back to the payments industry and kind of, you know, an example there. There's fraud that happens in the payments industry today. Actually, my credit card got hacked 3 weeks ago, right? Yeah, there was money taken, but the payments industry sustains that, right? You know, I do think, and this might sound terrifying for some, but I do think that the reality of more data shifting around an ecosystem, you know, the sheer volume of that, you know, there will be probably data breaches. Just don't be the first ones. Probably the name of the game. But, you know, the open banking ecosystem needs to find a way to sustain and, you know, I guess be self-sustaining like the payments industry does. Now, how will that happen? I don't have an answer for that question, right? Because, you know, money's replaceable, your personal information's not. But, you know, there are certainly, you know, that's why the OAIC is very much front and center with this as well, you know, to ensure that, you know, there's very much the right levels of, you know, privacy and security. I mean, what you do need to remember as well is that a lot of this information is moving across the banking sector already. That said, and generally economy, so you could argue that it's now in a safer ecosystem. But yeah, look, that would probably be my response to that. I know that didn't answer your question directly. There's a fair bit of detail, you know, around that in terms of the obligations, and that does relate back to the complexity of this. So, you know, I'd probably need a bit more time to run through the detail of that, and probably bring some of my SMEs into it as well, to be honest.
Yeah. There's no more questions coming through, mate. I'd just like to say thank you so much for taking the time to put this together. It's a area that has engendered significant interest from our members, and we really appreciate it. So I can buy you a coffee next time I see you.
Fantastic. Look, thanks, John, and thanks for the, you know, for the members for joining. You know, I'm more than happy to take any questions, you know, offline, or, you know, catch up for a coffee, you know, to talk about this topic. That was really just kind of a more of a whistle stop, I guess. And you know, there's certainly a lot more underneath that in terms of how this hangs together and works. And because it is new, you know, I would certainly encourage you to, you know, to reach out and have a chat.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And thanks to everyone that attended this evening. I hope you got a lot out of it. I certainly did. Bye for now.